Welcome to the Gold Coast North Anglican Church podcast. We're a vibrant church on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. Our worship styles are traditional through to modern, and we have families through to seniors. Our mission is to spread the good news of Jesus Christ throughout Australia and the rest of the world, and to encourage everyone who encounters us to reach their potential in Jesus Christ.
I wonder if you've ever had been given some difficult news, been given a hard truth. It can be difficult, can't it? Whether it's something like going to the doctor and they say, hey, look, you've got to get your health under control, or there's going to be some pretty dire consequences for you. Whether it was maybe when you were a student, maybe a teacher said to you, hey, look, you've got to get your act together with your studies and your homework and getting on top of things, otherwise you're not going to pass this subject. Maybe it was at work and you were told, hey, look, you've got to get to this certain level to be able to do your job. It can be difficult to get those hard truths, can't it? Particularly if then there's no kind of vision attached to it. A sense of, hey, look, if you did do these things, you could achieve this, or you could be like that. Sometimes you're only given the negative side of the equation. I often think of some of those TV shows where they'll get someone in, some sort of expert in a field, to go into a particular kind of business to help them. They're obviously struggling, they need the help, and so the expert will come in and assess the business and then deliver the hard truth. But of course, often what happens in those shows is the person resists the hard truth. This expert wouldn't know what they're talking about. Oh, it's not as bad as they say. If they do accept the hard truth, often the coach is able to show them, or the expert to show them a vision of what could be. This is what it could look like. They often transform a room or lay out the store or whatever it is. We are in the final week of our sermon series, Vision for Hope. And we see in today's passage, and just before today's passage, something fascinating. Jesus gives a pretty hard truth to the disciples and to us, but he also gives a vision for hope. And so Peter doesn't want to receive that hard news, but then Jesus follows up with this vision for hope. And so we're looking at Proverbs 29:18 from the King James translation, and some of you, just a little kind of Bible nerd moment. There are different translations of the Bible, because the original languages that the Bible were written in were Hebrew and Greek, and a little bit of what's called Aramaic, which is what we understand is the language that would have been spoken by Jesus and the disciples. And so obviously when you translate, there's a whole bunch of different things going on in translation. Which word do you translate? And then the way sentences are constructed. So it does allow some flexibility with the different translations. And so it can be really useful looking at different translations. And so from the King James Version, Proverbs 29:18, where there is no vision, the people perish. And so the invitation for us is to step into the vision that God has for us, for our own lives and for us as a church. And so we have had some difficult seasons. We've had to kind of swallow some bitter pills, you might say. Look at some of the hard truths that are being shown to us, where perhaps maybe we've made decisions where maybe we should have made a slightly different decision. Maybe some things that we should be prioritising that we're not. And so as challenging as those things are, as we kind of listen and respond, we can step into the future God has for us. And today we're going to be challenged as a church and individually to be listening to the voice of God and how we might be challenged, but also with a sense of hope, because God has a better future for us. As the old hymn goes, God gives us a future. So let's dive in and have a look at what our passage might be speaking to us today. Now, before we actually get to our passage that I just read, of course, preceding chapter 9 of Mark is chapter 8. No surprises there. And it's interesting, what happens is Jesus, verse 29 of Mark 8, Jesus is asking his disciples, who do people say that I am? And so they say, oh, you're John the Baptist, you're Elijah the prophet, maybe you're just one of the prophets. And then Jesus says, well, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, well, you're the Messiah, the chosen one. That's a really loaded term, and in the context of the day, what it really meant is they were looking for a political military, religious kind of leader to come and lead an uprising in Jerusalem so they could re-establish Israel as an independent nation. Why? Because the Romans were occupying Israel and much of the Western world. And so the Israelites really resented this and really wanted to re-establish themselves as an independent kingdom. And so they were looking for a Messiah, an anointed one, someone of God who was going to lead the people of God into a new future. And so Peter says, hey, you're the Messiah. And Jesus goes, well done, gold star for you. And then Jesus begins to teach them about what his Messiahship will look like. And he says, the Son of Man, which is a way he used to refer to himself, the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders, chief priests and scribes, and be killed. Pretty shocking stuff. And then after 3 days, rise again. And so they're all kind of scratching their heads, and he says this openly, and Peter pulls him aside and says, hey, Jesus, lay off the getting killed talk. I mean, if you're going to be the Messiah, you've got to instill a bit of confidence in everyone. And Jesus kind of goes from saying, well done, you've picked me as the Messiah, to, hey, get behind me, Satan, to Peter. You're thinking of human things, not divine things. And then Jesus then tells the disciples and those gathered, hey, if you want to follow me, you've got to be prepared to take up your cross. You've got to give up your priorities, give up what you think is important. You've got to actually go, hey, God, lead me, guide me. What do you have in store for my life? And so he issues a hard truth. And so the first thing I would say out of our passage is that Jesus delivers a hard truth. He delivers a hard truth to the disciples and to us. A wake-up call, if you will. That actually, if you look at our life, it's not all about us. It's actually about living a life for God and living a life in service to others. Which necessarily means you have to deny yourself. You have to kind of not prioritise your own pleasures and things that are important to you, but actually prioritise God. It's challenging stuff, particularly in an age where of consumerism, where it's all about what I buy and where I live and so on and so forth. It really challenges us. And so Jesus gives us a wake-up call that his Messiahship is different, and we've got to be prepared to sacrifice things to follow him. Then he gives a vision for hope. And so we see Jesus then takes Peter, James and John up the mountain. And traditionally we call it the Transfiguration, this passage, and today is actually Transfiguration Sunday, and it's the last Sunday before the season of Lent, the 40 days of preparation for Easter, beginning on Ash Wednesday, which is coming up this Wednesday. And so Jesus gives them a vision for hope. He gives them a wake-up call, gives us a wake-up call, but then gives a vision for hope. And so we see firstly that this vision of hope is a vision of glory. In the Transfiguration, we see the glory of Christ. 6 days later, Peter, James and John go up this high mountain apart by themselves, and he's transfigured, he's transformed, he's metamorphosized before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And this is a revealing of the glory of Christ, that yes, he's going to die, but as he said to them earlier, he's going to rise again in 3 days. And we see at the end of the Gospels that Jesus is risen, but it's a resurrected body. It's a different body. It's not the old physical body. It's that, but it's more than a physical body. So he's able to eat and drink, but he's also able to just appear to people. It's quite hard for us to get our head around. In fact, the Apostle Paul goes in great lengths in his letters, particularly to Corinthians, to talk about just this changed nature of the resurrected body. It's almost like a supernatural body, you might say. And so in this is revealed Christ's glory. He predicts his suffering, death, gives the disciples a hard truth, a wake-up call, you might say. And then he reveals that he on the other side of it, he's going to be changed and transformed, as are you and I. Then Jesus he gives them a vision of glory, and then he gives them a vision of fulfillment. And so there with Jesus is Elijah and Moses. And so Elijah and Moses are two types, two people that from the Old Testament that represent different things. Moses represents the law and Elijah the prophets. And Jesus said he came to fulfill the law and the prophets. And so we see that Jesus is with Moses and Elijah, and he is ultimately the fulfillment. And so no longer do we have to live under the laws of the Old Testament. We have to live under the law of Christ, as Paul would put it. And so what it highlights is that we're not called to religiosity. We're called to a relationship with Christ, to a relationship with God, and we get that through Christ who fulfilled the law. And so religious types, and there are lots of those we see in the Old Testament, and it's still a spirit that's alive and well today. It's all about the rules and the regulations, and if you're not following them, you need to be called out on it and so on. And Jesus says, no, it's not about following the rules, it's about a relationship. Now some people go the other way and rebel and think, gosh, I'm too far gone. But Elijah was called to the rebellious nation of Israel and to call them back to God. And so it's not about following rules, and you're never so far gone that God can't have a relationship with you. Because Christ fulfilled the law. He became the ultimate sacrifice to receive the judgment of God upon himself, to give us the forgiveness of sins. And so he gives us a vision of fulfillment. Now, next we see Peter, who kind of went from a gold star to then being kind of called Satan by Jesus, kind of just blabbering. He's terrified, doesn't know what to say. Hey, maybe we should build some tents. It's a really kind of odd thing to say. Perhaps it harks back to the fact that the Israelites originally travelled through the desert in tents, and so perhaps a tent, provides a temporary shelter for them, and it's reminiscent of Moses and his journey with the Israelites as they kind of camped out. Elijah was quite a nomadic person. Perhaps he camped as well. Not quite sure. But it's just really odd. And what it highlights to us is the third thing, is a vision for imperfect people. And so the good news is that if you want to know who an imperfect person is, well, you're looking at one. And I suspect if you're honest with yourself, you know you're not a perfect person either. Now, the challenge is it doesn't let you off the hook. Because sometimes, I don't know enough of the Bible. I've got too much of a history. If only you knew some of the things that would go through my head. I'm not really, and we self-disqualify ourselves. And Jesus is like, no. You can never disqualify yourself from taking your part in God's kingdom. He says that if you put your faith in him, have that relationship with him, doesn't matter your past or your history, you can do great things for God in his kingdom. And so we see with Peter, what does he do? He calls Peter. Now Peter could have gone, look Jesus, I'm a fisherman. You don't want me. But he says yes to Jesus. And it's a bit of a cliche, but it's the saying, God doesn't call the equipped. He doesn't call people all ready to go. He equips people who are called. And I know that's been my experience in my calling to priesthood, but we've all got a Christian calling. And God will equip us and give us the skills if we're willing to listen and to tune in to the voice of God. And so God uses imperfect people, and we use Peter. This same Peter, he calls and says, come be a fisher of men. This same Peter who says, hey, you're the Messiah, Jesus. The same Peter whom Jesus says, hey, get behind me, Satan. The same Peter who Jesus says, you will be the rock on which I build my church. This same Peter who rejected Jesus as Jesus was going through the trial and being led to crucifixion. The same Peter who said, I'll never deny you before doing it. The same Peter who gathered the disciples after Jesus' death. The same Peter whom Jesus called to feed his sheep. The same Peter who, when the Holy Spirit came at Pentecost, boldly got up and preached and told the world about Jesus. And thousands of people came to put their trust in Jesus for a relationship with God. And so God uses imperfect people like you and me, and he'll equip us as we go. And so God has a great plan and purpose for your life if you would just be willing to step into it, to stop making excuses for it. Finally, we see in this passage the whole reason why Jesus is doing this, because we see a vision that Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus, a voice, there's a cloud that comes from a voice and said, "This is my Son, the beloved, listen to him." And so this happened at the baptism of Jesus. In the different accounts of the baptism of Jesus, a voice comes and says, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I'm well pleased." And that's revealed to John the Baptist and those gathered, although different translations, not quite sure whether it's a voice directly to Jesus or to the wider group. But in this one, we see that it's God speaking not just to Jesus, but to Peter, James and John. He's speaking to them and saying, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." And so we see this movement from Jesus talking about his messiahship, that it will involve him dying, and they latch onto that part, but the rising again. And then we see the glorification of Jesus and this vision that he is indeed the Son of God. He was more than just a good teacher, more than just a wise man, more than just someone who did great kind of works for people. He did all those things because he was the Son of God. God who dwelt among us. And so for the year ahead as we go, I hope that you might ask God for a vision for your life. You might say, "Hey God, show me where you're leading." You might be in a really tough situation. It might seem overwhelming and hopeless. But to God it's not. Nothing is impossible to God. And so maybe reach out in prayer and say, "God, could you guide me through this? Show me a vision for hope." As a parish, I'm really kind of feeling hopeful that no matter what 2021 throws at us, God's developing a vision for us, a vision around being a church that worships him in such a way that people encounter God, a vision where people get into small groups and find family, a vision where we go out and help people experience hope, and so many other different elements. We're even seeing a bit of a vision of hope around our finances for the year ahead. And so I'm looking forward to the year ahead as we seek to help people know and follow this Jesus who is the Son of God. And as we listen to him and accept, God can engage us as imperfect as we are. And by his Spirit, he can help us actually become people who reach our potential in him. And you see that in Peter's journey, from a humble fisherman to the ups and downs of his journey to someone who goes on to lead the church in a powerful way. Maybe God's not calling you to lead a church, but he's calling you to do some pretty amazing things on his behalf. And I'm excited about that.
Thanks for joining us for the Gold Coast North Anglican Church podcast. I invite you to like us, follow us, subscribe to our podcast so that way you don't miss out on any episodes. If you want to know more about Gold Coast North Anglican Church, then head over to our website. The address is goldcoastnorth.org.au, and there you can find out all about our church. I also encourage you to engage with us on Facebook. We would love to pray with you and connect with you. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. God bless.